Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Aaron. Thank you so much for spending part of your day today to learn about a topic that is very important to both sport and human performance. Now, joining me today is Jeff Willardson. Jeff is an associate professor in the Health and Human Performance Department at Montana State University, Billings. He teaches biomechanics, exercise physiology, research methods in health and human performance. And he teaches kinesiology, of course. So he earned a PhD in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in exercise and wellness from Arizona State University and was named the outstanding graduating doctoral scholar. He has co-authored over 120 scientific manuscripts examining different aspects of resistance training for improving health and athletic performance. He also holds a CSCS from the NSCA and is here to talk to us about his new release, Developing the Core. This is the second edition of this book and is part of the Sport Performance series done with the NSCA. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Now, I want to start by giving listeners, a little bit of insight into who you are. I gave a background of, some of your accolades and kind of what you're up to now, but I always like hearing the origin story. So, what interested you in, building a career in kinesiology, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, always been interested in just the training process. It's interesting. As an athlete that competed in track and cross country, I was always fascinated with the conditioning process and what might be happening inside the body to allow us to do a task more effectively.
Hmm.
And then getting to Arizona State and being around great professors like Dr. Brent Alvar and Dr. Lee Burkett.
Hmm.
Some of those guys, Dr. Brent Alvar is still very prominent in the NSCA. He gave me lots of great insight and new perspectives, especially. I think we get maybe trapped into seeing things one way, and that's kind of the purpose of education, is to learn to see multiple perspectives, to pick and choose maybe what works best for you, and as you begin to develop your own philosophy. So was a certified strength and conditioning specialist from 2004, again with the encouragement from Dr. Brent Alvar. And then just as I started my career, I was at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois, and kind of had an interest in three different areas. One was rest intervals with relevance to resistance training within a workout. Another was muscle hypertrophy.
Okay.
As when I was younger, I competed drug-free in several bodybuilding competitions. So that was naturally kind of an interest on muscle activation and electromyography. And then the last one was something that I picked up from colleagues actually in Brazil. And they turned me on to this idea of the importance of training the core.
Okay.
And in looking at that area, I found it to be fascinating because there really hasn't been a scientific consensus on what the core is, what muscles comprise the core. If we're going to train it, we have to define it.
Right.
So then if we define it, that helps us in prescribing exercises that can hopefully contribute to movement of the body as a whole. So we have this connection point between the upper and lower extremities that comprises the core. We have skeletal structures, we have muscles, we have connective tissue, we have passive tissues that kind of create stability. But how is it that we get this optimal combination of muscle activation that allows us to stabilize this region and allows us to efficiently transfer energy between the lower extremities and upper extremities? And so my first lit review on this topic was published in 2008.
Okay.
And then was invited by a couple of great professionals, Jay Dawes, Brad Schoenfeld, who those guys are still doing outstanding work. Roger Earl at Human Kinetics to put together a book. So that culminated in the 2014 edition.
Mhm.
And then that's done really well. And so now we have the second edition. So we have a lot more knowledge that's been accumulated over time. We have new chapters. For example, chapters 2 and 3 in the new textbook, chapter 2 specifically addresses athletic performance and the connection to the core contribution to that. But then also chapter 3, we look at more of an injury standpoint. So connecting the rehabilitation process into creating a healthier athlete and getting back into competition. From a practical standpoint, the last half of the book, we have 3 new chapters added: mixed martial arts, rugby, lacrosse. Those are all things that are growing in popularity. There's high school lacrosse state tournaments now, and so with I think with the increased emphasis in high school on competent strength and conditioning professionals, this will be a very valuable resource to establish a foundation, because a lot of these kids maybe their first experience with strength and conditioning is when they have that college scholarship. But if we can get them to where they have good training, foundational training program in high school, I think that builds a bridge to much healthier and a better experience as a college athlete.
I think that's such a good point, because I think I mean, I've been working in the private sector for a little while, but even that, I mean, we can talk about how the strength and conditioning industry itself is still relatively new compared to other industries. So I think what you said right there is so important that even I would say, and I was going to mention this later on too, I would say even if you're a sport coach, you're not a strength coach, I mean, this would be an excellent resource to get just so that you know that you're doing the right things to try to prepare your athletes for competition, and just to make sure that they're as strong as possible. And I do want to get into some of that injury reduction a little bit later, but you mentioned a lot of the contributors for the first edition. And I know, just like kind of looking through this edition here, some of the names that stand out, maybe from some of my personal interests and experience, there are contributors like I know Stu McGill and Brandon Lee contributed here. Satoshi Ochi and Mark Kovacs, which I love training tennis players. So anyone familiar with tennis knows that Satoshi is very instrumental with the USTA. Tyler Friedrich, who has worked with Stanford Volleyball. Everyone that knows about collegiate volleyball knows how successful that program's been. So, yeah, in addition to yourself, anyone who picks up this resource is going to get knowledge from a number of different professionals that's going to help them. So, I know you started to talk a little bit about, kind of defining the core. And like you said, there could be a number of different definitions for core and core exercises. So I guess give listeners a little more insight into what we actually mean by core.
I think the best way to define it would be the lumbopelvic hip complex and muscles that control that. I think we could, if we were to go with a more broader definition, it could include the entire torso. But I think primarily the muscles, the bones that comprise the lumbopelvic hip complex. Those muscles that connect the lower extremities with the upper extremities. I think in teaching kinesiology, this will be my 20th year teaching that class. The evolution of how we teach kinesiology from isolated muscles when I first started teaching 20 years ago to now, we teach more, the muscular system is more like a highway system. So
Okay.
muscles are connected to each other. So muscles transfer force further than just their attachment points. They're not only attached to skeletal structures, but they're also attached to each other. And so we have connective tissue, we have fascia that connects muscles together that transmits force all the way from the lower extremities across what we would define as the core region, the lumbopelvic hip complex, all the way through to the upper extremities. And so teaching that muscles work in coordinated patterns versus just in isolated joint functions is probably the biggest evolution in the way we teach kinesiology, and specifically how we view the core and its contribution to movement.
Mhm. Okay, so now whether we're talking about athletic performance or human performance in general, doing normal activities of daily living, we always point toward the importance of core strength and core stability. So I guess for listeners trying to get a better grasp on this, what are core strength and core stability, and why are they so important in this context?
So that's a good question. I look to the writings of Dr. Stuart McGill for that. He writes on this concept of super stiffness,
Okay.
establishing super stiffness, which doesn't involve dynamic action so much as isometric actions. So creating a stiffened uh, region, which allows that effective transfer of force between the upper and lower extremities. So core strength, I would best define in isometric terms, being able to absorb as well as apply force. Um, and then core stability is our ability to maintain a neutral spine under load.
Okay.
So our spine best absorbs and deals with force when we can maintain that natural curvature.
Okay. So that goes into another question or area that I kind of wanted to get into. Now, I guess a common area that practitioners obviously probably hear complaints about most is low back pain. Now, I know it's been documented that roughly 84% of people are going to experience low back pain at some point, and I think the number is closer to 25% will have chronic low back pain. So, I guess what is the exact correlation between low back pain and core strength, and how could increasing core strength help that?
Well, again, I look to the writings of these great scientists we have out there, like Dr. Stuart McGill.
Mhm.
His emphasis has been on establishing core endurance more so than absolute strength.
Okay.
So being able to carry out an isometric action, understanding that the load itself can change, which requires a different recruitment pattern. Being able to establish stiffness under varying types of loads over longer durations. And it's not about necessarily a single bout to fatigue, but it's more about short bouts of intense muscle activity that is repeated several times throughout the day or throughout a sporting event, and we're still able to maintain stability. So that's what I imagine as a resilient person that's going to be protected from low back pain, is being able to maintain this stiffened core for several periods throughout the day, given that we have lots of different demands and loads that our body needs to adjust to.
Okay. And I guess going along with that, we talked about it a little bit already, but when I think most people think of, strength training, we talk about, strength, power, athletic development, but we can also increase core strength for injury risk reduction. So from maybe you can draw from some of your own personal experiences too, like what roles do a strong core play in, reducing the risk of injury?
Well, I think, again, drawing from great people out there, many of them contributors to this book, uh, looking at it in terms of this concept of energy leaks. So we
Okay.
have this kinetic energy, the capacity to do work, um, this ability to transfer force through links in our body, skeletal linkages that are controlled by muscles. So if we have a weak link in the chain, so to speak, this kinetic force chain through our body, then that creates increased demands on other areas in order to carry out a task. Over time, that can result in chronic overuse injuries. So in this way, I think if we begin in the middle or the center or the core of our body and develop this capacity to stiffen this region, I think that creates better transfer of energy, and especially with the lower extremities, we have better alignment. I think it's interesting if you look at a lot of the evidence from Meyer and Ford out of Cincinnati Hospital, showing that activation of this region creates better alignment all the way down the lower extremity, especially at the knee joint. So we find if we're more stiffened through the lumbopelvic hip area, then the knees tend to be better aligned, and we have reduced valgus stress. So looking at it this way, an ankle injury or a knee injury could be a symptom of dysfunction at more proximal areas like the lumbopelvic area with those core muscles.
Okay. Now, something that I really like about this book, there is a lot of, science behind it. So it does go in and really explain a lot of those things that you just mentioned there. But I really like that there are specific chapters for specific sports. And I think that's important for someone, just picking up this book. I think you can read it straight through, but it's also, kind of sectioned off so that if you want to just look at one certain area or one topic area, you can go straight to that. Now, I know we mentioned there are sections like for baseball and softball, basketball, football, golf, soccer, hockey, swimming, tennis, track and field, volleyball. You mentioned the, MMA and rugby as far as additions to this second edition. And it gets really specific with the core workouts for beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Now, something that stood out to me, I think, is that section on tennis. I told you I train a lot of tennis players, and it mentions that on average, tennis players will make more than 100 directional changes in one set. So anyone that's familiar with tennis know that's a lot of movement within a small range. So maybe something that people don't think about all the time is the importance of core strength as far as agility and change of direction. So can you kind of explain that a little bit and how important that is for a change of direction?
Sure. So I think with a change of direction, you have a rapid deceleration followed by a rapid acceleration. So it's a reversal of muscle action, essentially with the eccentric part occurring to slow the body down, bring the body to a stop, and then the concentric part to accelerate the body in a different direction. So in order to do that effectively, you have to have proper limb alignment, because it's your limb alignment that ultimately puts force into the ground. And we know from Newton's third law that the greater the amount of force you put into the ground, the more force you get back out of the ground. And so I think being able to stiffen the core, to brace the abdominal wall, allows us to effectively maintain lower extremity alignment, which essentially allows us to get more force from the ground. So our push off going into a full stop to a quick change of direction, we get more out of the ground if our core is fit and we're able to brace that way.
Okay. Now, getting into some more specific examples on what people can actually do. I know some of I guess my favorite core exercises that I would put into programming are things like, cable or band chops or lifts. I like loaded carries, which have a number of different uses. So there are obviously different ways that we can strengthen the core. So what are some staples that you think should be included in all programs?
You mentioned a great one there. There's so many different forms of carries. Taking prescriptive principles such as just altering the position of the load. We're not necessarily changing the load, but we're placing the load further from the core region,
Okay.
which increases muscle activity to maintain our body's equilibrium and balance. So carries are a fantastic way. Carries involve those isometric muscle actions that are so important. Some of the other ones, again, going from the first edition to the second edition, I think there's more emphasis on this super stiffness concept
Okay.
promoted by Dr. McGill. So we're looking at polyp type presses from lots of different angles. So resisting motion through the transverse plane, resisting motion through the frontal and sagittal planes. So my recommendation, especially a foundational program with a young athlete, is learn to establish super stiffness first through carries and polyp press variations, lots of different variations of planks when you can position your arms and legs in such a way to create different challenges for the core. And then once you've established that isometric fitness, then we move on to more dynamic approaches where maybe we have some rotation as long as there's not any injuries that would contradict that type of activity.
Okay. And what I love about that and everything that you just said, I think it brings to light where some people might think that you have to get super complex to do things to strengthen the core. But the things that you just mentioned, I mean, when you kind of break it down, I mean, they're basic things. I mean, someone can, do a plank in their office or in their bedroom or something like that. So, basic things like that are so important to help strengthen the core. So I love that point that you just made there. So, so in the book, like I said, it kind of breaks down specific workouts for, different types of sports. It gets very specific. Um, would would you recommend, I guess, a full core workout? I mean, because there are a number of different exercises that are listed that are recommended. Or would you actually break those up and include those into, a regular strength workout, a full body strength workout?
I think with any type of workout, and we're getting more into this type of material, especially with some of the new stuff coming out with the Essentials textbook next year.
Mhm.
The way that we design a dynamic warm-up is so important. Dynamic warm-ups are increasingly specific to the demands that an athlete faces in their sport. I think core activation should be a part of a dynamic warm-up, whether that's just a few planks or where we're resisting loads from different angles. I think increasingly we're not necessarily fatiguing the core during a dynamic warm-up, but we're spinal tuning. So we're getting those spinal stabilizing muscles ready to go because that has a direct influence on how well we move with the arms and legs as well.
Okay. Now we've talked about how like you have an extensive knowledge base. You've been teaching this, researching this for a while. What is maybe one of the most I guess interesting things about core development that you've learned over the years?
I think our views have really, just like anything, every field and the knowledge evolves over time, and we have lots of excellent people that contribute uh, knowledge in anecdotally, practical settings mixed with some of the findings we have in science. And it's important to understand that research has its limitations.
Hmm.
It's difficult to duplicate in a research setting what you find in practice. So research and practice are both an important part of this process where we learn to do what's best and create the best workouts and treatments for patients and athletes. Um, Probably similar to what you've observed over the years is we have less emphasis on isolated actions, less emphasis on things that have a heavy involvement of the hip flexors. We try to place less emphasis on doing things like sit-ups or partial curl-ups.
Hmm.
We have athletes standing in more functional positions. You mentioned farmers carries and suitcase carries, all those different types of movements. So overall, I'd say we're starting to look at the core not in terms of an isolated body region, but how it contributes to total body movement. Excuse me.
Hmm.
Excuse me.
Okay. So I do want to thank you for your time. You've given a ton of information in this relatively short amount of time that we've been talking. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. For our audience, everyone listening, if you haven't got your copy yet, if you, like I said before, if you are a trainer, coach, athlete, I encourage you to order your copy today. It's available now on our website, humankinetics.com, sorry, us.humankinetics.com, as well as Amazon. I'm sure you can find it in a number of different places there too. You'll find information on, everything that we talked about today and so much more. There's so much knowledge contained in this one book. I was really impressed with how much was actually fit into this book from yourself. You're going to learn from so many other people, like we mentioned, Stu McGill that you mentioned quite a bit here today, Brandon Lee, Satoshi Ochi, Mark Kovacs, Dean Somerset is involved in there too. So,
Tom Nesser at Indiana State.
oh yes, yes.
Sycamores.
So yeah, just so much information contained in this one resource here. So again, Jeff, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll actually give you the last word here to kind of wrap it up. And if there's any way that people can keep following with all the research and all the great information that you're putting out there.
I think this is it's a foundational textbook if you're looking to develop speed, quickness, endurance, power. This is where it all begins, is right in this part of the body. So if we can get good core fitness, then that's going to help everything else along the way with your prescription.
Okay. Awesome. Great way to wrap it up. Again, if you don't have it yet, get your copy, Developing the Core. You won't regret that decision. Excellent resource to keep on hand. So again, Jeff, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you soon.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Thank you.